Hi, this is Talkback. I want to share with you a wonderful interview I did with Andrew Schneider. Andrew was in Connecticut as the head of the Connecticut ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union, but now he works for Fairness West Virginia as the director. He's the director of an organization that is the advocacy organization dedicated to the fair treatment and civil rights for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer West Virginians. The mission is to ensure that LGBTQ people can be open, honest, and safe at home, work, and in the community. And I talked with Andrew about all the challenges that the LGBTQ community and the civil rights communities in general in this country are facing in our era today, the world that we're living in today. I hope you enjoy that interview, and I want to thank Andrew Schneider so much for his dedication, for his hard work, and for his fierce record of fighting for civil rights for everyone. Thank you. We're wondering what's going to happen tomorrow. Are we going forward or backward? And so I want to start talking to you about that. Your main issue has been, in the last several years, Fairness West Virginia, which is the statewide civil rights advocacy organization dedicated to the fair treatment and civil rights for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer West Virginians. I want to point out this great pamphlet for your organization that has the mission statement and some of the things that need to be done. So it's a big issue, and it's been in the news because of the Supreme Court decisions and because of everything that's happening on the local level around the country in libraries, trying to ban, burn, some people say, or just take books off the shelves in libraries, at school and public libraries, that deal with issues involving the LGBTQ community, right? Did you think that when you started this work that we would get to this point where we seem to be almost going backwards in many ways?
Well, when I was working for the ACLU, there was a sort of an old saying that civil liberties battles never stay won. And you know, throughout my lifetime in the field of civil rights, I've always been, you know, sort of going back to fight these battles again and again and again. And it seems to sort of be sort of a part of baked into our system, where, you know, the Constitution is a living, breathing document. It has to completely, constantly be reinforced and reaffirmed. It is not something that's static, that you can just expect to be there for you when you need it. You have to constantly fight for it and reinforce it.
Well, that's true, but I always felt, looking at the history of our country, that I get what you say. You have to still keep fighting. There are always battles to be won. Maybe there's a step backward here and there. But for the most part, the thrust of our country, I thought, was always toward expanding rights, for whether it's the civil rights, whether it's rights for the LGBTQ community, whether it's, again, in 1973, abortion rights, privacy rights that were read into the Constitution. That is now all being threatened. Am I wrong that for the first time, especially with this Roe versus Wade overturning decision, we're going backwards?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was one, you know, sort of blip in American history prior to this where you had prohibition, with the banning of alcohol for approximately a little over a decade. But yeah, this is the first time that you have, you know, a fundamental right being taken away in our, you know, Constitution's history, and it's more than troubling for you know, women and those who believe in you know, women's right to choose and reproductive justice. It's troubling for anyone whose rights are underpinned by the right to privacy. So, you know, it's access to contraception. It's LGBTQ equality. I mean, it was very clearly stated in Justice Clarence Thomas's concurrence that the overturning of Roe versus Wade was just the beginning, that he was going to go after gay marriage and was going to go after contraception next. So, you know, we have to be very vigilant and fight for these rights, and also, you know, fight for the restoration of a woman's right to choose.
Yeah, the other thing that decision and some of the other things that are happening in this country, the makeup of the Supreme Court, the way it is, like a 6-3, very conservative majority, more than we've had in many, many years, makes me think that when your institutions that you rely on and supposedly have faith in, when they don't reflect the will of the people, something's wrong with the democracy, right?
Yeah, but we have to be careful about saying, you know, the will of the people. I mean, oftentimes we've relied on the Supreme Court historically for protecting minority rights, rights that weren't supported by the majority. I mean, when Brown versus Board of Education was handed down by the U.S. Supreme Court in the 1950s, the majority of the country probably wasn't supportive of integrating the schools. Probably a majority of the country would have done the opposite, but thankfully, you know, the more progressive court at the time was of the opinion that that constitutional rights shouldn't be subject to the whims of a majority. That's what the Bill of Rights is all about, protecting the rights of the minority against the tyranny of the majority.
Mm-hmm. And it was important that the Supreme Court Chief Justice Warren decided that it had to be a unanimous vote.
Yes.
He made sure that this court spoke as one to the nation. But again, that was expanding rights. That was equalizing education for the African American community. When we had before, everybody said, well, they can have an equal education in a separate institution. The court said, no, separate is not equal. But again, that was, again, what I'm saying, moving rights forward, not backward.
That's right.
So tell me, how did you get interested in your career as an attorney? And
I'm not an attorney.
You're not an attorney?
No, I just play one on TV.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So your education is in
So my education is European history. That was my major in college at Washington University. And I got into ACLU, which was my first job out of college, simply because my stepdad had introduced me to the organization when I was a teenager growing up in New York. And he sort of came of age during the McCarthy era in the 1950s as a newspaper reporter, saw his left-leaning colleagues who were reporters getting blacklisted because of their left-leaning views during the McCarthy witch hunt. And at the time, the ACLU was the only organization coming to their defense. So he became a lifelong member of the organization. And then during the 1980s, in very sort of heated dinner table conversations about current events, he introduced me to the ACLU. And I gained a great deal of respect for the organization. And so during the 1988 presidential campaign, when the Democratic candidate, Governor Michael Dukakis from Massachusetts, ran against George H.W. Bush, George Bush attacked Michael Dukakis as a card-carrying member of the ACLU, basically using the old, tired communist attack and trying to tie ACLU to communism. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't bothered by the cheap shot on George Bush's part, but I was deeply frustrated by Michael Dukakis' seeming inability to defend himself or the organization. So I was just about to begin looking at colleges at that time, and I sort of got it into my head that maybe it would be fun and worthwhile to start an ACLU chapter in George Bush's backyard. So I started looking for colleges that were sufficiently conservative to execute my plan. And I went down for a college tour because a teacher at Scarsdale Public High School, where I grew up, had gone to Washington Lee and said, hey, this would be a great school for you to check out. You can get a good education. And he said, even a liberal like myself and like yourself could find a good place there, but it's also very conservative. So I think this is exactly what you're looking for. So I go down for my college tour, and like 1 out of 6 dorm windows is draped with a Confederate flag. I mean, it was a very kind of eye-opening experience for me in 1990 when I went for my college tour. And I was like, this is where I've got to go. I mean, this is where Robert E. Lee is buried on campus. It's like the shrine of the Confederacy.
Who's buried?
Robert E. Lee.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I said, this is the place where
So
I'm
what
going
is
to
it?
go.
What's the name of Washington?
Washington and Lee University. Yeah. And it's called Washington and Lee because George Washington had donated like $50,000 worth of James River Canal stock back in the late 18th century. And then Robert E. Lee became president of the university right after the Civil War.
Wow.
So they both are named.
Is
in
it
the
now,
university.
in all of the work to take down the statues, I'm sure Washington and Lee
yeah.
is never going to change their
Well,
name.
they've had
some controversy?
There's been a huge debate raging on campus
Really?
these days about changing the name. Absolutely,
So
no, it's not immune to the national controversies of the time. In fact, as conservative a school as it is, I learned this after going there. Back in 1970, when the Kent State massacre happened, students who were gunned down by the National Guard protesting the Vietnam War, campuses all over the country went on strike. You remember?
Yes.
And Washington Lee went on strike as well. I was amazed to learn that.
Right.
The campus shut down. Back then, students everywhere were sympathetic.
So it's not a completely right-wing backwater.
No,
No.
I mean, first of all, it's a great school. I love the school, and I am so glad I went there. But it was very conservative, and it shaped me for my future career. I mean, when I basically enrolled as a freshman, I went about going dorm room to dorm room, asking my classmates to sign up as card-carrying members of the ACLU. I ended up getting 80 students.
Wow.
And at the $5 student rate, so it wasn't very expensive.
Was there an ACLU chapter?
No, I founded one. I founded the ACLU chapter there, but what was so good for me in having this experience is that I had half my education outside of the classroom. Being surrounded by students that had differing viewpoints forced me to be quicker on my feet, defending my views, but also really trained me on how to listen, and which is such a key skill in the work that I have. So I don't just simply jump to judgment when I am discussing politics with someone with a different view than mine. I listen to what they have to say. I don't, they may say something that sounds really off color, sometimes maybe even offensive. I don't sort of go for the jugular when I hear something that may be offensive. I listen, and I calmly then discuss how I see things differently. And it's that approach that allowed me to reach some of these folks and even change some hearts and minds in the process.
Well, I think it's a very refreshing thing, because in the kind of environment in which you grew up, you might have just gone to some Eastern liberal school and got educated with people with a similar background, similar views, similar political ideas.
And it probably would have entered a different occupation.
And maybe a different, maybe the same occupation, but in that narrow lane, in that lane. And what you did was enabled you to enlighten others, be able to talk to other people who don't think the way you do, and maybe change the minds. And that's why you're in West Virginia, you're in a place that in Connecticut, we think of that as almost like a foreign country, right? A red state.
Oh, I mean, I can't tell you how frustrating it would be coming back to see my family in New York and see many of my friends there who would put their arms around my shoulder and say, "Oh my gosh, how do you do it?"
Right.
And I was like, it's not a big deal. I mean, this is a labor of love for me. I love being in West Virginia. I mean, the people there are so incredibly friendly. They're so incredibly warm-hearted and generous. I'll give you an example of my first experience moving down there. In 2001, I knew absolutely no one in West Virginia. And my mom had a close personal friend who had relatives in Charleston, West Virginia, the capital where I was going to be living. And she put me in touch with them so that I'd have a place to stay as I looked for my first apartment there. And I drove down to West Virginia, rolled into Charleston, West Virginia on a super foggy day in early July. The mountains are so close to each other that the valleys are called hollows or hollers, as we pronounce them there. And so driving up this hill to this person's house, it was almost zero visibility, and this was at night, and there was a car right behind me, clearly wanted to pass. So I pulled over to the side of the road to let them pass because I wasn't sure if I was going in the right direction. And instead of passing me, the driver parked right behind my car, and then pulled up to and then got out of his car and walked up to my window. And he says, "Are you lost?" And I said, "Well, I'm not exactly sure where I'm going." He said, "Where are you headed?" And I mentioned the name of these friends that I was staying with. And he says, "Oh, I know them. Why don't you follow me? I'll take you there."
Your accent is fantastic. Have you
Thanks. From living there for many years,
Right.
it's sort of easy to acquire. But anyways, he escorted me there, and this wasn't just an isolated experience. This kind of, friendliness, this kind of gesture has happened time and time again. I joke to people that you don't need a AAA membership in West Virginia because the people are so helpful and friendly that they will help you if you break down on the side of the road.
So that is true, but there still is an element of the Trumpian right wing that we can't discount. That is pretty strong in West Virginia.
It's the strongest.
Yes.
I mean, we, as a state, gave more votes to Donald Trump in both the 2016 and the 2020 elections than any other state except for Wyoming. Basically voted for him to the tune of almost 70% of the vote.
Wow.
And another interesting story, you'd think that, LGBT, doing what I do to advance and protect LGBTQ people from discrimination would be a nearly impossible task there, given that environment. That couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, there's challenges, and that's why I'm there, and that's why I like the work I'm doing. I like challenges. But it's not impossible. And when Donald Trump got elected in 2016, it followed a year where we helped 5 municipalities adopt LGBTQ non-discrimination laws. And at the time that we got the 5th community, Wheeling, to adopt such a law by unanimous vote in their city council, a national organization informed me that West Virginia municipalities adopted more of those laws than any other state in the country that year. And shortly after that, like I said, shortly after the election of Trump, I get this call from a reporter at Reuters who wants to do a story about how life must be so difficult for LGBTQ people, and how does, an LGBTQ civil rights organization like Fairness West Virginia cope? And I said, well, I don't know if it's exactly like what you plan to, the sort of slant that you plan to write about. Should point out that we have just helped 5 communities adopt these non-discrimination laws. And she said, really? I said, yeah. In fact, the latest one, Wheeling, their vote happened shortly after the election of Donald Trump, and Wheeling as a community overwhelmingly voted for Trump. So they're not the same. Trump voters are not necessarily anti-LGBTQ. And she said, oh, that's really interesting. Let me go back to my editor and see if I can then write a story about that instead. Mm-hmm. And that's the story she ended up writing.
So what you just talked about brings up an interesting point, and I think a lot of people need some education about it. We live in a federalist country where we have a federal government, a Congress that passes national laws, and then we have 50 states, and each state can pass their own statewide laws through their state legislatures. And now down on the community level, municipalities, towns can pass their own ordinances and laws, and it's a patchwork that shows a tremendous diversity. Sometimes we think it's not good. So let's explain that by talking specifically about your issue of LGBTQ rights.
Yeah.
We do not have, do we have any national laws that protect LGBTQ rights other than the Obergefell case, which granted the right of same-sex marriage?
And the Bostock decision,
okay,
which bans discrimination in employment against LGBTQ people.
Okay. So those laws and decisions on a national level, they must be followed by the states
Yes.
and the municipalities.
That's correct.
But are there some municipalities in your pamphlet, you say that West Virginia is one of 28 states without any law to protect people from discrimination because of their sexual orientation or gender identity.
Yeah.
Explain that.
Okay. So while the Bostock decision states that you can't discriminate against LGBTQ people in employment, people in states that lack these protections, like West Virginia, landlords can still discriminate against gay people. It can still discriminate against transgender people, and there's no recourse. You can be kicked out of your home by a landlord simply because you have a gay lover, or you have a husband, if you're a man, or you're a lesbian, you're married to a woman. You can be kicked out for that, and there's nothing you can do about that unless you're in one of the 16 municipalities that we've helped to adopt these non-discrimination laws. So while it's great that we have the employment protections, we still lack housing protections, and we lack protections in public spaces.
So one of the things your group is doing is lobbying and trying to get a statewide law passed that would provide those protections.
That's correct. And in lieu of a state law, since our legislature right now is very right-wing and is not in a place that we would like to be able to pass one of these this statewide fairness law. So we have to resort to the municipalities, to this patchwork system of protecting as many people municipality by municipality, so that as many LGBTQ people can be protected from discrimination.
So now let's broaden it out to the Supreme Court decision overturning Roe versus Wade, because that one of the things that Alito said in his decision was, this is going to simplify everything. It's now going to go back to the states. Easy. Brushed his hands off. It's not true.
Farther from the truth.
Now we're going to have different states having different kinds of restrictive laws, some more restrictive than others, some banning abortion completely at any level, some making other restrictions. Some states like Connecticut already has codified Roe versus Wade and is asking to be a sanctuary state where people can come from other states.
But the burden on poor women is just unbelievable. I mean, women who can't afford to travel to states that can perform abortions, women who can't afford to get the pills mailed to them. I mean, it's going to be a real burden, a real hardship, and there's going to be a huge cost to society as a whole.
Right, but what's happening is that people in blue states like Connecticut should not be saying, well, no problem, we've codified Roe versus Wade, we're safe. We have an election coming up in November. That could change everything. Our state legislatures can change and can revoke those laws codifying Roe versus Wade.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what about the Congress? Right now, President Biden and the Democrats are talking about hopefully maybe getting rid of the filibuster so that they can pass a national law codifying Roe versus Wade, making abortion legal. But what if there's a Republican Congress in the fall? If there's a national law against abortion rights, what will happen in blue states?
Right, that's right, and that's a very real risk, and that's why people here in Connecticut can't ignore states like West Virginia. We're the states that have catapulted someone like Donald Trump to the White House, and which is another reason why our work is so crucial, so important, because we're there on the ground changing hearts and minds, making a difference, trying to chip away at that mentality that elects those people to the White House, that elects those people to Congress. And so that's why, someone might one of your viewers from Connecticut may say, so why should I care about a group like Fairness West Virginia? This is exactly why. And I'm now just going to do a blatant pitch. If you go to our website at fairnesswv.org, you can learn more about our organization, and you can join in support if you would like.
Okay, so let's go back and talk about the rights that have been won, starting with the Griswold versus Connecticut decision. Now, I know you see you're not a lawyer, but you certainly know all of the cases and can talk about the history of all the cases and are much more conversant than some lawyers I know about these things. So let's go back to what was the importance of the Griswold versus Connecticut case, because the legal reasoning in that case is what has been used to grant many of the rights beyond, whether it be abortion, same-sex marriage, and so on.
Absolutely. I mean, they basically, the justices in Griswold determined that there was a right to privacy embedded in the Constitution, a combination of various rights in the Bill of Rights that added up to this right to privacy. And that's been the underpinning, the foundation for many other rights to come, such as abortion.
Okay. And then after abortion, the rights, the LGBTQ rights, there was a case on sodomy. Can you tell us about that one?
Johnson
versus Texas?
Yeah, Johnson versus Texas. That struck down the sodomy laws throughout the country based on that right to privacy. You know, this, I think the law in Texas, and there was an earlier case in Georgia that ruled the opposite way, only like 19 years prior or 17 years prior to that, where basically I think a police officer just walked into you know, someone's bedroom and arrested you know, a gay couple for engaging in sodomy. There couldn't be a more blatant violation of privacy than that. And the justices in Texas versus Johnson ruled that the right to privacy protects, you know, consensual.
Right. And then many southern states had laws against miscegenation, whites and blacks intermarrying, and there was a Loving versus
Virginia as well.
And they use that same constitutional reasoning.
The same principle.
And then the Obergefell case, to talk about that case.
Well, that was the case that basically included in the Constitution protection for marriage equality. So you didn't just have to be someone of the opposite sex to marry. You didn't have to just marry someone of the opposite sex. You could marry, you know, your same-sex partner, and that also, you know, it sort of drew out of this right to privacy that was created by the Griswold case.
Right. And so when the Supreme Court overturns Roe versus Wade and overturns it on the basis that that reasoning establishing the right to privacy was wrong at the get-go from the beginning.
Yes, it then threatens all of those other cases.
Yes. Yeah. So this, you know, isn't this the first time? I know you said, yes, we had a prohibition amendment and then we revoked it.
Yeah.
But that was almost like giving back a right to buy and sell alcohol, right? It was almost giving back a right.
Right.
Here we're taking away a right that we granted 50 years ago through the court and then through various state legislative acts and so forth. This is very scary, isn't it?
It is. It's alarming. I don't think that, you know, these other rights are going to be taken away imminently. I mean, for instance, you know, on LGBTQ rights, two of the justices that voted to overturn Roe actually were part of the majority in the Bostock case that basically banned discrimination against LGBTQ people. So it doesn't look like on just gay rights alone that the court is ready, you know, imminently to do the rest of the dirty work.
But the court's not the only arbiter. There's the Congress.
But I'm going to say that, you know, it's so close now that one other justice, if one other justice retires, that could shift the balance to where every one of those rights are on the table for repeal.
And then it's not, people should know when the court speaks, it speaks for the entire country.
Yeah.
And it overrules any laws that the states or municipalities have made that are in conflict with what the Supreme Court has said.
Yeah.
But the Supreme Court is only one of our institutions. There's the Congress.
Yeah.
If the Republicans take over the Congress, what's to stop them from passing a bill banning abortion, a bill banning same-sex marriage? Those are possibilities.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, right now, I'm sure President Biden in office now, we have a Democratic president, will veto those, and they probably will not be overridden.
Right.
But what if we elect a Republican president in 2024? So it's not just the court that we have to worry about.
Well,
right?
it's also one of the reasons why we're part of a group of equality organizations nationwide that are working with Republicans and Democrats to pass a comprehensive bill protecting LGBTQ people from discrimination across the board, including housing, including public accommodations, including credit and jury, being on a jury, all sorts of protections that currently LGBTQ people are denied. Right. Because this is like really a window of opportunity. We don't know what's going to happen in November.
Right. So the Obergefell case happened, and I think there was a groundswell of good feeling in a lot of the country, and many people said, whoa, we don't want to fight that anymore. We have that decision, and now let's let gay people go about their lives peacefully. Didn't you get that feeling when that decision came out?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the unsettling things that I encountered when I started the job at Fairness is I went to a gay pride festival in West Virginia, and wanted to talk about some of these political issues that we have yet to achieve, like LGBTQ non-discrimination at the time in employment and housing and public spaces. And I was told by the ones involved with the festival that we don't need to deal with those things anymore. We got marriage equality, everything is settled. There was this complacency. And that's the troubling part. That's the disturbing part. If people are complacent, we won't come out in numbers to vote for the right people in November. And it's one of the reasons why I hired a voter engagement organizer to get out the LGBTQ vote. I mean, only 25% of LGBTQ people in West Virginia are registered. I mean, that's crazy.
It is crazy. Well, millions of Americans are now registered.
Yeah.
And studies have shown that of those who are not registered, many of them would vote more progressive, vote Democratic.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's something we all, I'm sure it's not just our problem alone. I'm sure, like you said, it's pervasive, it's nationwide. But that's what we have to focus on.
Right.
We're focusing on it. Everyone needs to be focusing on it.
Okay, so that sense of complacency and that sort of some good feeling that we had, that we've got this right now for same-sex couples, and we're going to be marching forward and upward on that. That's changed with Trump and Trumpism. And now I want to talk about what we see happening all around the country. We call them the culture wars.
Yeah.
The ban the books movement. It's happening in school boards.
Yeah.
It's happening in public libraries. It's happening right here in Connecticut. One town, Coventry, had a display in their public library for Gay Pride Month. And a group of parents marched into the library, ripped down the display, brought it into the librarian's office, and told the librarian that she must burn these materials. In my hometown of Colchester, our first selectman decided that one of the displays of the Gay Pride bulletin board at the Colchester Public Library, which is about a biography of RuPaul for 8 to 12-year-olds, he ordered the librarian to take that off the shelves without any authority. So this is going on all over the country, and they're talking about banning, burning, taking off the shelves books involving our racism and our history of slavery and civil rights. CRT, the critical race theory stuff that they're doing. But the gay rights community, LGBTQ, has, I think, been the brunt of so much of this. I need you to talk about that. What is going on? And is it happening in West Virginia as much as it's happening everywhere?
Absolutely, yeah. No, we're not immune to what's going on nationally. We're very much a part of it. And we, like almost every other state legislature, had to deal with legislation during our legislative session that would ban teachers from teaching any subject matters that would make other students uncomfortable, essentially. It sort of came out of this, CRT, critical race theory, campaign that the Republicans initiated as a wedge issue. And we fought against the bill. It nearly passed. We were lucky that we got it stalled enough that the clock ran out on it by just a couple of minutes, and the bill died at the very last minute of the legislative session. But it would have greatly harmed what our educators are allowed to do in our schools, and supporting their LGBTQ kids, and even protecting them from bullying. All this sort of thing. We actually initiated a project since then. It's called our Safe and Healthy Schools Initiative, where we've hired a teacher with 35 years of experience in the public schools in West Virginia to help develop curriculum and help support LGBTQ students and help teachers support them from bullying. West Virginia has I believe, the 7th highest rate of bullying in the country. It's a problem, and we need to protect those kids so that they can focus like every other child on learning.
So we need to protect kids that are being bullied, but the teachers are being bullied.
They are.
The librarians are being bullied. I mean,
look at the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida. We know that particularly the fact that we have a program now in place that's going to support LGBTQ kids. We're probably going to see one of those bills next in our own state legislature.
Outrageous.
Yeah.
But the threats, the intimidation, the fear of violence, I've been reading articles about librarians who are quitting their jobs, who are having mental health breakdowns because they can't take it anymore. As a past history teacher myself, who got called on the carpet 50 years ago for teaching about civil rights and the Black American experience, I always wonder why the teachers aren't rising up more. But they're frightened. Their livelihoods are at stake. Their families are at stake. I think Trump has absolutely helped to keep this movement going and watering it.
But the point is, he's helped to keep the movement going. This movement has been going on for years. I mean, West Virginia was sort of one of the first places to gain national attention for these censorship issues. We were part of the textbook wars of the 1970s, where a group of right-wingers sought to take out certain books that taught about multiculturalism.
Right.
And it created such a firestorm that the KKK came to Charleston, West Virginia, and marched, and schools were firebombed.
Right.
It was a scary time.
Yeah, but see, I always thought that we were better than that, and that those elements would always exist in our culture, but that they were more on the wane. And just talk briefly about the whole concept of this grooming stuff, talking about pedophilia.
It's awful.
Grooming, and then the conversion therapy, the idea that being gay is somehow a choice, and it can be through counseling or therapy, it can be changed, and people are bullied into that.
Well, it's really it's awful. It's disgusting, because what they're trying to do, the opposition, is they're trying to dehumanize us. They're trying to make us less than human. And in an era where there is this proliferation of guns and very few laws holding people back from using them, we're reaching a point where you know, there could be some, you know, major national
Well,
tragedy.
there have been hate crimes against gays.
Well, there has been the gay nightclub in Orlando,
Sure.
for sure. But I certainly worry about that as well in my work a little bit.
So, we've talked about all the problems and the bad state that I think we're in. Is there a silver lining? What's the positive thing, and what can this? I think it's important that you pointed out that we are a patchwork, and how important it is that we know what's happening in other states, because their legislation, their issues can come home to us.
Yes.
And we have to be vigilant about that.
Exactly. If you support an organization like Fairness West Virginia, making it more inclusive, you know, making the people understand these issues better, then you're going to get better representatives that we then vote for on the national level, which will in turn help the entire country.
Okay, so what can the average citizen do? They don't know about the LGBTQ people. They want to be open and loving and fair, and they don't know where to turn and what to do, and they're afraid. Their neighbors next door have a Trump sign, and they've got the gun loaded in the truck, and they feel somewhat intimidated by all of that. What should they do?
Well, people need to get involved in the political process. People need to vote. People need to get involved in a campaign, you know, progressive candidate running for office, you know, should sign up to support them. Sign up to support organizations like us. Go to our website, fairnesswv.org is also a good place to start. We have lots of volunteer opportunities. You can also donate to us by pressing the donate button on our website. We've been doing really amazing work despite the challenges. You know, we now have 16 municipalities in West Virginia that have these non-discrimination laws, including the smallest town in America with one. Thurmond, West Virginia, population 5.
Really?
And all 5 of them voted for it. It was unanimous.
That's terrific.
And then we just got our 4th community to pass a law banning the harmful and discredited practice against of conversion therapy.
Right. So don't make conclusions just because it's red.
Yeah. And for anyone out there who has the stereotype of West Virginia as where Deliverance was filmed is dead wrong. Deliverance was filmed in Georgia, by the way, and West Virginia is not that place. And there's a lot of promise and hope in West Virginia, a lot of good people in West Virginia, and you know, with a little education, the kind of work that we're doing, we can make West Virginia a better place, and we have made West Virginia a better place, and that's what we will continue to fight for.
And but we still have to fight for national laws that will.
But you know, we are a collection of 50 states. You can't just simply focus on Connecticut and expect the rest of the country to follow.
Right.
Other states need to catch up. West Virginia needs to catch up. We need your help to make sure that West Virginia...
Well, at the last election, and it may be this one, those of us in the so-called blue states, although even now that blueness is being threatened in November, may volunteer to not... I actually physically went to New Hampshire in 2016, and there are people talking about going to some of the more battleground states.
Come to West Virginia. It's a beautiful state. The mountains are gorgeous. The people are so friendly. It's really I love living there. This is my 2nd time living there, by the way. Just a little history. I first started working for ACLU Connecticut as their development director. Then ACLU West Virginia hired me to be their executive director, so moved down there. That's the story I told you earlier. And then ACLU Connecticut hired me back to be their executive director in 2007. But I had such a deep connection with the people of West Virginia. My deepest friendships were in West Virginia, and I describe it as the place where the friendships refuse to fade. So my friends were looking for me looking for a job, for a way for me to return, and they found, you know, this organization called Fairness that had started in my absence while I was here in Connecticut. And at a certain point by 2014, they were looking for a new director.
Looking for you, So that's great. So we're going to end. Why don't you give the website again?
It's fairnesswv.org.
Okay. And now, as we end, why don't you tell us, what is it you would most like to say now that you have the floor?
Well, I would say that if you care about the future of democracy, you care about the future of these basic fundamental constitutional rights, you need to get involved in the democratic process, in process of government and the process of social justice. This is not a time for us to sit on our couch and watch Netflix like we did during the pandemic. We have to get out there and roll up our sleeves and get to work. It's the only way that we're going to be able to save our democracy and make sure that we can, give a, country that protects our basic fundamental civil liberties to our children and our grandchildren.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Andrew Schneider, Fairness, West Virginia. And we will see you next time on Talkback. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Oh,
Yeah,
we have to do
thank you.
this.